I'm back with Sailjuice.com, and I'm very excited to have with us today Brett Beyer from Sydney, Australia. Brett is a 13 times World Masters champion. He's also been to 4 Olympics coaching lasers. When it comes to going fast on the laser, that this guy knows what he's doing. So we're very excited to have you, Brett, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problems, Mike. Good to be here.
Yeah. So, I mean, 13 times champion. I mean, that's over different venues, different years. I mean, you must have seen all different conditions. So obviously you must be an all-around good in all conditions.
Yeah, well, I think you have to be really these days. We all have our preferred conditions. And for me, that's definitely, wind and wave. That's where I certainly feel most comfortable, or perhaps I have the biggest advantage over my competition. But I try to do still quite a lot of training in the flatter water and the lighter breeze, simply because that's one of my weaknesses.
Now, so we know, like, I've seen your downwind clinic. I've had the privilege of watching that, and that seems to be a get out of jail card in laser sailing these days now. Like, I mean, the downwind has evolved so much in terms of speed, and you're obviously excellent at it. So we've got a video here, and it's a view, obviously, you sailing, and I want you to just maybe talk to us a little bit about some of the techniques you're doing. What are some of your go fast techniques and secrets to making this laser go fast downwind here?
Yeah, sure.
So maybe just start us off. This is you in Sydney Harbor, I believe?
Yeah, that's right. Maybe a 10 or 12 knot sea breeze, 15 knots maybe, but essentially just a medium breeze, sea breeze with a little bit of wave in Sydney Harbor. That's right. So essentially all I'm really trying to do is combine a nice by the lee angle with a bit of load to a wave direction broad reach. The boat speed's a little faster than the wave speed, so it's not particularly challenging to catch the waves. My focus has always been what to do with a wave once you're on it, as opposed to catching it in the first place.
Now, one of the things that I'm noticing right off the bat here is you seem to be sitting further back than, what we normally see, I guess, with average sailors. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, really, because once you're on the wave and the waves are fairly easy to catch, you want to be sailing a short boat as far as water lines go. So the further back you can sit in the boat and the more you can keep your bow out, compared to the wave in front, the boat certainly is faster and has a lot more flow. You can flick it a bit left to right because the bow's not catching and dragging water. So really the aim is always to be sitting back as far as possible once you're catching waves.
So is that a normal water length right there with the bow kind of the water hitting about the mast step?
Yeah, pretty much. That's even considered, you certainly wouldn't want more bow pushing, but you'll probably notice as the video progresses that there's many times where you look and the water's pretty much down to the mast level or back even further. So yeah, the focus is always to keep the bow out and flowing and just don't hit the wave in front.
Now, one other thing I'm noticing here as you go through this, you're really not like you're changing your direction, but there's really not a lot of sheet change happening there.
Yeah, that's true. Because really, once the breeze gets up, strangely enough, there's not that much difference in sheet from a by the lee angle to a broad reach angle, or there shouldn't be anyway. In many cases, people undersheet by the lee. That is, they have too much boom out, too much sheet out, and they're sort of forced to use a lot of sheet when they upturn to the broad reach. So if you notice here, the boom's not out particularly far, but this is still by the lee what I'm doing here. But the boom's actually inboard from 90, which happens to match by the lee, and it's close enough to broad at the same time.
So when you say in terms of your boom out, like what are you judging how much boom you've got out there in this breeze? What do you, is it pressure you're feeling, or is there a mark on your sheet?
Yeah, it's actually a bit of both. I mean, once you're in a bit of a rhythm, you don't really have time to have the distraction or, to be looking at this mark on the main sheet. It is not a bad training tool to have a 90-degree reference mark on your main sheet. But essentially at this point in time, you're trying to feel the power, and feel's a bit of a vague term, I know, but a lot of good sailing is based on what feels right and what feels loaded. So in this case, I'll always sheet on by the lee to the point where the main sheet gets almost unloaded. And I know I'm getting a bit close to jibing, and that becomes one of the reference points for, gee, don't sheet on any more than that.
And once you've sheeted on that far, so you've trimmed it in essentially, how much are you letting it out beyond that?
Not much, really, only if it gets a bit close to jibing or you get a little bit of a shift and makes you close to jibing. But living there, we sheet on close to jibing is actually quite a good thing. You don't want to be too vulnerable to jibing, but yeah, the sheet tension actually is quite close to, a leech flicking, jibing sort of position.
Now, the other thing that becomes apparent to me in this is that you get down in this position here, so you're loading up the leeward hull. What's the thought here?
Yeah, it's one of these weird things on a laser that you get this reverse flow for by the lee, which forces some windward heel. So by leaning down against the leeward heel is a good way to sort of counteract the forces that are going on. So you want the windward heel, that's part of a normal by the lee, but you want to be able to sort of lean and press against it. And that's the conversion into sort of boat speed and power. So this leaning down here is actually really quite important. A lot of people don't do enough leaning down to leeward to actually generate the upturn.
So once you get back up into this position, so is this your upturn position here?
Yeah, that's certainly a relative upturn because you can see the boat's a bit flatter, the body's a bit more upright, the tiller extensions across the body. And again, these are all references for what actually is a relative upturn. It might not be quite a big broad reach, but certainly it's not as much by the lee, or maybe it's not any by the lee.
So one of the things I notice with sailing lasers and myself and seeing other average laser sailors, a lot of times the boat almost gets out of control where, you have to get your rear end out of the boat to press on that leeward side of the hull. So yes, that would be way too much heeling.
Correct. That's too much heel as a result of either too much sheet out, or which is quite a common thing, as I said, for by the lee, it's quite a common mistake, too much sheet out. So it's either too much sheet out, producing too much heel, or the by the lee angle is actually too great. You don't need a big by the lee angle. But either situations, it's definitely a mistake. You don't want to find yourself having to constantly lift the backside off the deck to press that much. You shouldn't have to.
And really, at watching you here, besides the side to side movement, you're not doing a lot of fore and aft movement. It doesn't look like.
No, I mean, your back is back, so you can see here that I'm still quite a long way back and occasionally leaning back with the upper body. But essentially all you're ever really trying to do is sail in a non-conflicted way. That is, have the right heel for the right sheet tension for the right direction. And that's actually one of the more difficult things for by the lees, to get this accuracy, a non-conflicting way of sailing the boat technically. No matter where you're pointing the boat, you have the right heel and you have the right sheet.
So I'm stopping it periodically here, and it's almost like a freeze frame shot each time. The attitude of the boat looks almost the same all the time. Like you've got the perfect water length on the boat. So I guess that's key, is keeping that same pitch, throughout.
Yeah, that's right. And the boat should always want to steer a straight line for you. That's the indicator for what is the correct sheet and the correct heel, that the boat actually wants to go straight until you decide otherwise.
And you're really not using a lot of tiller, it doesn't look like?
No, that's right. If I want to sort of upturn from this position, it's a case of just lean down, let out a little bit of sheet, and that starts the upturn. So a little bit of rudder, but primarily a bit of rig heel to complement the turn.
And the knee down, your aft knee down, that's more to lock you into the boat.
Yeah, that's for me. That's sort of the only way I feel comfortable enough to sail downwind. That you can sort of push and shove the boat around a little bit if you need to. Some people actually do sail with their back knee up. I'm quite tall, so it feels a bit more normal to have my leg down and locked back into the boat a little bit. And it just gives me comfort to feel secure no matter what the boat wants to do. It doesn't feel like I'm going to topple out the side of the boat or capsize.
So the other thing I'm noticing is you're really just sheeting with your forward hand. You're not really two-handed sheeting on this downwind run.
Yeah, if the upturn is big enough, and again, you have to if the sheet needs are big enough, you'll have to sort of multiple grab, like sheet to tiller hand and re-grab a couple of times. But if they're relatively small upturns, these are small by the lees and small broad reaches. So occasionally, if you desire to do a massive broad reach, like quite a considerable upturn, definitely you'll probably sheet on 2 or 3 times passing it to your tiller hand.
And the other thing that is becoming obvious to me is your focus seems to be more always forward as opposed to looking back. Is that the case, or?
It's definitely the case. I mean, in these conditions, it's a stable sea breeze, so we're not really looking back for pressure. There's not, it's a fairly constant sea breeze amount of pressure. So downwind in these cases, it's just a case of whoever has the best wave catching skills, and again, what to do with those waves will succeed. But the waves you are catching are the waves that you are catching up to, which are on your bow. Again, quite a common mistake is a lot of people look behind them and go, wow, there's a big wave behind me. But essentially, we're catching up to the wave you want to catch. And so therefore, the focus is very much just 1 or 2 waves on the bow.
Now, one other question. When you're surfing the waves, so are you really just sitting on top of this wave and riding this wave, or are you trying to go down the face of the wave?
We're definitely sitting up. Again, one of these common mistakes is a lot of people sort of catch the wave and progress too far down the face of the wave and sail themselves down into the trough. So I really deliberately try and catch the wave, which is not too hard over 10 knots, but catch the wave, but then definitely stay up high, because that's also one of the things that keeps your bow out nice and high. It's body weight back, but also the boat back on the wave, which will automatically keep the bow out effectively. So definitely stay up high on the wave.
So I guess the other thing with all this S turning that really you have to calculate is how much extra distance you're sailing. How do you weigh that against, the speed gained?
Yeah, it's a really good point. So essentially, it's a bit of a VMG sort of offset. You're right. You're doing more distance S turning, and you have to be guaranteed that the extra speed you accumulate by doing S turning offsets the extra distance. And that can be hard to know, but essentially for me, if I can produce a good upturn with a short-term catchable broad reach, the answer is you have already offset the extra distance. So the answer is you have to be guaranteed that you've done a successful upturn. And if you have, the extra distance doesn't, come into the equation. But if you miss the upturn, it's a VMG penalty.
So now just, you obviously do a lot of coaching, been to 4 Olympics. So you get to see a lot of laser sailers, and I imagine you get to coach some average ones, excellent ones. What would you say is a common mistake like the average sailor's making, that, especially on the downwinds?
I think for the downwinds, it appears quite simple in its own right, even watching videos, but it's quite complex in its accuracy. The required accuracy is difficult. As I said, getting the right sheet, heel, and direction all agreeing with each other is part of the challenge, but then also it's a timing about when to upturn and when to downturn. It's also a timing issue. So it's quite technical, but also tactical, and where's the bottom mark and where's the next gust, etc. So I think for the average sailor, it's quite normal that the downwind, improving their downwind, is essentially one of the last things to improve in their sailing sort of routines. And pretty much because it's a feel, and yeah, this feel in detail just takes time. It requires many, many hours. And on any boat, you do 1 hour upwind for a 20-minute downwind, and just by sheer volume, we're just not getting the amount of downwinds that we can and what we need. So for the average person, their downwind is often their weakest link. Not at Olympic level, of course, because they're all very good, but downwind is definitely where the action is, because you can make, for example, myself, even in a quality masters fleet, I can make 100 meters easily downwind, but I probably can't do the same upwind. And it's reliable and it's quite easy to do. So for the average person, there is very much a downwind focus, and getting this accuracy and getting the volume of training required for downwind. That's definitely at club level, states or nationals level.
So, I mean, with your 13 world championships, obviously, I would assume they've all been at 13 different venues. So each venue must bring its own challenge to it. So how early do you try and get to the venue to figure out the waves, the wind?
Reasonably early. Sometimes we're limited by charter boats. Like if I go to regatta and you're doing a charter boat, which is quite common at the Laser Worlds, for Open Worlds and Masters Worlds, they only supply charter boats, X amount of days out from the regatta. So sometimes they do early charter, and we'll certainly avail ourselves of early charter. I try to travel with a couple of mates of mine, so we all travel together, stay together, train together, and sort of get the most out of each other on water as possible.
And in terms of keeping your body in shape, so you're how old now? 54? Or?
I'm just about to turn 55, so okay. Just about to crack into the GM category.
So I mean, the fact that the Laser being quite a physical boat, how do you complement your sailing to keep yourself in shape?
These days, probably not as much as I used to. I've come from a sports science background. So once upon a time, before full-time coaching, I was full-time fitness training, personal fitness training. So I have a pretty good base level of fitness that over the years has been able to sustain me, even though I don't do a whole lot of sort of off-water training these days. Certainly an active lifestyle, like even in coaching terms of being on the water and bouncing around in coach boats and pushing boats around all day is active. I'm a keen cyclist, so I certainly like to get out with mates and cycle, and that's quite complementary to hiking. So yeah, between active lifestyle, some cycling, getting on water as much as possible, arriving at regattas and just really sort of upping your training volumes before a regatta, which does scare some people because they all think they should be resting. But I'm a little bit the other way. I like to sort of blow the cobwebs out, go really hard, and then maybe have a day or two of rest before the regatta. But yeah.
So when you're peaking for a Worlds, what are we talking in terms of volume on the water coming into the Worlds?
I think ideally I'd like to do 3 or 4 days a week. I don't often get that luxury because full-time coaching doesn't really allow me. But in an ideal world, I'd certainly like to have 3 or 4 days, 2 or 3 of those days back to back to get a little bit of momentum. Even if you're a little tired from one day to the next, it's not a bad thing to be sort of physically pushed, but also a bit mentally drained, because the reality is not every regatta is an easy regatta, and part of it's fitness, but also part of it's strong mentally and so that goes a long way to your training. And again, if I can always line up just really good training partners and everyone's enjoying themselves, everyone never wants to give up and everyone wants to beat each other and beat up on each other, that's the best form of training.
So when you're training, you typically would set out a type of schedule for the day when you go out there? You have certain things you want to work on, or is it you're just racing, or?
A little of each. I certainly have a focus in mind that I know technically I want to achieve, but of course that's relative to the conditions we're presented with on the day. So I know what my weaknesses are, and ideally I'd like to sort of train specifically on those rather than just rely on my strengths all the time. So I'd certainly try and schedule my training in my case, if it's light breeze and flatter water, I'll try and get out a bit earlier before the sea breezes kick in and we've got 15 knots and waves. So I'd certainly like, although it's not the most exciting training, it's something that I see as necessary to be a well-rounded sailor, and also just for my coaching. And if I'm going to be a good coach, I feel like I have to be knowledgeable in all conditions.
So, I mean, over those 13 years in different venues and 5-day regattas, I mean, you must have seen your fair share of light air days. So do you still feel you have this speed advantage downwind in the lighter air, or is it?
It's definitely less so because it's less technical without the waves and without the challenge of catching waves and the challenge of what to do with the waves, which is my strength. And as soon as my strength downwind is gone, I'm a little bit the same as everyone else, or at least maybe the top, 20 or so boats, which is there's not much technical advantage to get the downwind, but then I have to rely on something else, which is my tactical advantage upwind. So at some point, you just got to recognize what are your strengths and always play to them, of course, but train your weaknesses and play to your strengths. So coaching, of course, one of the advantages of being a full-time coach is you see sailboat racing very clearly at some point, and there's no surprises with the starts. There's no surprising with wind shifts. There's no surprising with all the tactical and strategy combinations you can think of. So generally, tactically, I sail consistently, whereas other people might be a little bit more prone to some mistakes in the lighter stuff.
So it's interesting. One of my last interviews was Santiago Langer, and he being obviously older like ourselves, and he's still really a student of the game. He says he still likes watching video of sailors and reading books. And now a little different with him because he's switching classes quite a bit, with the NACRA going to foiling. But I mean, you with the laser, are you still staying on top of it? Do you watch, some of the top racers, or how do you stay motivated?
I do watch a little bit, but more just for curiosity. I know all the top Olympic sailors, and I've been on the circuit for 15, 20 years coaching. So even when we're stuck in Sydney, I still like to watch the European championships and things like that have just been completed. Not so much for technical, but just to see, how everyone's sailing and their decision making, and the videos and GPS presentations these days are so phenomenally good that you can, from a distance, you can actually, while they're racing, say, I don't know about that one. I think he's going to make a mistake, and see how it plays out. So I still have certainly an interest in high quality competition. But again, the coaching, even if I'm coaching a club level sailor, which I still certainly do, and that makes up a chunk of my income these days when I'm not traveling overseas, the same things present themselves, really. There's nothing new, really. I mean, you're targeting coaching at a lower level, and you have to change your expectations, of course. But of course, the detail is still there. We just have to, it's quite methodical and step by step, and say you still got to have the right sheet tension, you still have to have the right sail shape. And I don't just coach lasers, I coach boats, even Flying Dutchman's, which is essentially the opposite end of the spectrum as far as technique and the technicalities of the boat and rig setup. But over time, you realize a boat is a boat is a boat, and there's not a whole lot of variations in the way you should sail it and the way you should not.
Well, I appreciate your time, Rhett, and we really enjoyed your presentation, and continued success, and look forward to seeing how you do in the next Worlds.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks, Mike.